Much can be said with certainty about Arknights Endfield after its beta test. It's got huge potential, it's going to be very popular, and this NPC is really sorry.
Really sorry, really sorry, really sorry, really sorry.
Having played the full duration of the beta, I can confidently say that Arknights Endfield has the potential to define a whole new generation of gacha games. That is not an exaggeration. But I really must emphasize the word potential. Because right now, I am increasingly worried that potential may never end up being realized. That very same potential could also turn the game into the biggest disappointment I've ever experienced in all my years of playing games. Firstly though, I really need to get the glazing out of my system, so let's just get that out of the way, shall we? There is so much that I fucking love about Endfield. Literally from the moment you open the game, it hits you with the
Arknights.
God, it's so good. Harking back to its roots, announcing itself to the world before greeting you with peak music just for the login screen. The satisfaction of seeing all the sprawling factory belts come together, customizing map traversal with zip lines, the activity in the Dijang with your operators working and saying hello.
You're here, Administrator. How's your day?
The view of Talos 2 from the Nexus. The phenomenal sound design.
Karmic justice! Nobody's getting...
The eerie environment and music of Valley 4. The gorgeous environment and music of Jinlong. And the headhunting. Oh my good lord, the headhunting. The music on the banner screen gets you all excited as if you're preparing for a rocket launch. You click the button, you hear those distant scintillations, and then... by far the best summoning experience in any gacha game I've ever played. Not even close. Oh, right, good, got that out of my system. I have been fortunate enough to play both the alpha and beta of Endfield. In its alpha state, I was hooked. I was full of optimism and I was wholly convinced that it would be my favorite game of all time. So what changed in the beta? Thankfully, not the base. It's even better than before, and it has a ton of room to grow and become much deeper. Of course, even though the base has a very obvious target audience, with the nature of it being a gacha game, there will inevitably be those who are simply addicted to account progression as gameplay, and will play games they would otherwise have zero interest in, just to feed that addiction. For those players, rather than simplify the gameplay, which would only annoy its fans and still wouldn't be good enough for the gacha addicts, they instead created these wacky inflatable tube guys, which you then have to murder in cold blood, which unlocks a bunch of tutorials for it. They are quite possibly the most needlessly hand-holding tutorials I've ever had to do, but I don't mind their existence at all if it means they can keep cooking and make it deeper, more complex, and even more fun and satisfying in the future. And for those who are hoping for just another account progression dopamine machine, who lament the mere thought of meaningfully engaging with the base at all, fear not, there is actually an easy solution. Don't play it. Unfortunately though, in spite of everything I've mentioned so far, Endfield has made what I feel are very significant mistakes. Pretty much all of them are fixable, these are far from permanent, but in general, beta tests tend to look pretty similar to their full release versions. So let's dive in. The main story is, to put it bluntly, bad. There's no nuance at all. Landbreakers are completely one-dimensional and uninteresting, just generic bad guys who want you dead. Compare them to Reunion from the Arknights main story. They're introduced to us as fighting for the same goal as Rhodes Island, that being to liberate the infected, but with very different methods. There is a clear conflict, I understand the motivations of the antagonists and how they ended up where they are. Landbreakers have none of this. We also know almost nothing about the aims or motivations of the main villain Neferith, who might just be one of the most toothless villains I have ever seen. With the sole exception of one line when you first meet her, she shows up from time to time, says some vague bullshit, and fucks off again. How on earth can this be written by Hypergriff, the same people who gave us Patriot and Tallulah? They can very reasonably fix all of these issues before the game's release, but the alpha's story wasn't good either, so I'm not convinced they will. I have no issue with the notion of a simple story well told, but that does not describe Enfield's story at all. And it's not just the writers who are at fault. At one point, Chen refers to Neferith as Nephi, which I found extremely weird. Why is she giving the main villain a friendly nickname? Turns out this is because in every single language except English, Chen says essentially the equivalent of Nefer something or Nefer whatever, because the name went over her head. It's a subtle way of adding to her characterization. Instead, the English translators collectively hotboxed their entire office and decided Chen is actually giving her the kind of cute nickname you'd normally give to close friends. I am astounded at how incompetent this is, but then again, these are the same translators who translated cold to cryo, for no reason in particular, I'm sure. Most of the dialogue is also exasperating.
You should feel lucky, because I am the only one who can take care of technical problems like this. Say no more. Stop moving already, and do something about that ether side rupture before it gets any worse.
Guys, writers, please! Is it too much to ask not to be treated like an idiot? Who could your target audience possibly be for this dialogue such that you feel the need to explicitly state the obvious multiple times and make sure everything is repeated very slowly for clarity? Oh, motherfucker! Consistent with the emerging trend of disappointing writing, frustratingly, are the characters. Not because their writing is bad per se, but because there's just so much wasted potential. For example, Ember is a Sanctor and Shaihi is a Sarkaz. We know from the Arknights story that the Sanctor and the Sarkaz are seemingly always in conflict with each other due to what the Sarkaz see as the Sanctor's betrayal. An image of a Sarkaz and a Sanctor holding hands was very prominent in Arknights' 4th concept trailer as a holy shit moment because its meaning was so significant. Meanwhile, the only mention of something even slightly resembling a connection to this lore is one line in Ember's file saying, "The children born and raised in Talos 2 would never learn that angels and sanctum used to carry beautiful meanings in times past." If I'm interpreting this correctly, this is the writer's way of saying that the entire history of Terra, all the extraordinary, catastrophic, mountain-moving events that directly led to Terran races ending up on Talos 2, not important. None of it matters anymore. I am so disappointed in the writers. What a monumental waste of such an incredible wealth of lore at your disposal. All that being said though, I must admit, I do love the fact the resident Australian, Aviwena, says verbatim, "Burden beast piss. How does it taste like? Crikey fucking bloody oath, Sheila, you piss-drinking cunt." Despite nearly all the writing being a massive letdown, I want to make it explicitly clear the voice actors, thankfully, are actually good at their job and have done marvelous work with the material they've been given. I'm a huge fan of Aviwena, Dapan, and Wolfguard's regional accents.
Oh, of course. You're the boss. You point the way.
Not a problem. Leave it to me.
And on top of that, the animations are way more expressive, the models are outstanding, and their idle chatter adds a ton of...
Idealism is always detached from reality, and it's the first step towards disappointment.
Thank you, Wolfguard. Also, just one more thing. I am no prude. I am a straight man who plays gacha games. I'm not gonna pretend not to like fan service. But guys, holy fuck, relax! Subtlety is dead. Humanity is cooked. Have mercy on my soul. Guide me from the wayward woman, Lord Jesus. Now, as I said before, everything I have mentioned so far is fixable. Bad writers can be replaced and characters can be given good writing later on, which is why all of this is negligible compared to the #1 issue I have with Arknights Endfield in its beta state, because it is not fixable once it is released. In order to get there, we first need to talk about combat. Combat in Endfield for the most part revolves around skills and skill points. Use a shared SP bar to trigger a battle skill, which in theory triggers a combo skill, which triggers even more of them, and so on. Combo skills are essentially just QTEs with extra steps that deal damage. You press E when the prompt shows up and it gets the neurons going. Basic attack strings essentially serve as the cost of getting a final strike, which is the last hit in the sequence. Final strikes restore SP, so for the most part you really want to be getting the full sequence of basic attacks to that end. That logic generally applies to the combat as a whole. Given the importance of skills, you want to be maximizing SP restoration, hence the prevalence of Arklight in nearly every team composition. Her individual damage may not be anything noteworthy, but her ability to generate SP is excellent, and more SP means more damage. I'm honestly kinda surprised she isn't a 6-star. Now, the beta also adds the ability to dodge. Due to the nature of final strikes being your primary way of restoring SP, you need to commit to the full sequence of basic attacks to get it, which means currently there is still very much a choice every time an enemy attacks you of either dodging or taking the hit, and the dodge is often not the best move. But it still gives me cause for concern. Future 6 stars are inevitably going to be designed to take advantage of more and more gameplay mechanics. Right now, the dodge only exists as a means of survival rather than facilitating damage. But if a dodge exists in any capacity, there is a very real danger of them leaning much further into it by, say, having a 6-star with a combo skill triggered by a dodge, and then more units with kits centered around dodging who synergize with that 6-star, and a new 6-star whose basic attacks don't get interrupted by the dodge, and before long you'll end up with a player base wanting more and more action, understandably seeking to flex their ADHD action gamer reflexes as their expression of skill. But with Enfield's base building being the way it is, and with the fact that they didn't dumb down the actual substance of the base building at all since the alpha, the vision the Endfield team had was clearly aimed at the kind of player who likes to obsess over details, who may not necessarily want something based on reflexes, but instead something more strategic, controlled and precise. The base obviously appeals to this kind of player, while the combat has ended up with a sort of identity crisis. Unsure of what it really wants to look like, trying to be a bit at everything while never actually excelling at any of them. Most of the strategy comes from the team comps rather than the execution. The actual process of triggering combos and doing damage and so on, while satisfying for a while, is very easy. Use a battle skill or two, do your basic attack string, face tank smaller hits, use combo skills on cooldown, and repeat. I quickly exhausted every single possibility for improvement, and even self-limiting clears like duos and solos are not at all challenging. I died more often to platforming than to enemies. This is mostly due to the current cast of enemies lacking any real variety or complexity. Sure, it will improve with time, but the state of the game at launch has real implications for the future of the game. Hypergriff has been through these motions before. Today, more than 5 years after its launch, Arknights is known for its meaningfully challenging endgame modes to the point of Chinese universities hosting nationwide Arknights tournaments, with thousands of dollars in prize money. I've kept playing for all these years because Arknights has such a rich endgame and high skill ceiling, but for a long time it didn't. When it first launched, the most interesting gameplay it had to offer was Chapter 4. It took them years to make integrated strategies a permanent game mode. But the difference is Arknights didn't offer anything else in terms of gameplay. There was nothing else to play the game for. With Endfield, Hypergriff seems to have regressed into doing the same thing by making it frustratingly shallow in its launch state. But doing so this time is a critical mistake. Those who are looking for strategic depth will not find it. It is pathetically easy, and it will remain that way for at least the first 6 months or so. Which means once those players have completed their bases, which really doesn't take that much time, they may not stick around for that long. But those who are looking for action will get plenty of it from daily and weekly gameplay, regardless of the difficulty. The ability to dodge not only gives those action-seeking players their daily dose of dopamine, but also significantly diminishes the need for healing. If their overworld healing needs can be met with items you can craft directly from the backpack, and a 4-star like Snowshine can provide literally all my healing needs with room to spare anyway, what reason does the action-seeking player have to engage with the base at all? The outposts are optional. All they need at that point is some components to make gear. This, combined with the lack of strategic depth in its launch state, creates a serious risk of cultivating a majority of players who are exclusively invested in the action gameplay. Now, this will be a controversial take, but I would not be making this video were I not willing to defend it. I think the best decision Endfield could possibly make after the beta is to remove the dodge entirely. Hypergriff's development decisions will be driven by what players want, and if the vast majority of players aren't engaging with the base, the game's evolution will reflect that. This is my #1 issue with the game. They are creating a precarious combination of action gameplay in the combat alongside the slower gameplay of the base. We already have an example of such a precarious combination in a gacha game failing to hold in Zenless Zone Zero's TV mode. It is an action game, it was advertised as an action game. Lo and behold, the action gamers didn't like the TV mode, and Hoyoverse decided to all but kill the TV mode entirely. The difference though is that Zenless Zone Zero was built from the ground up around its dodge and parry mechanics. It is fundamentally an action game, that is where its strengths lie, and that decision was an act of leaning further into those strengths. Endfield, on the other hand, has been built from the ground up around the base, yet it is taking clear steps towards action gameplay. Obviously they aren't going to kill off the base entirely, you might as well announce end of service at that point, but I am convinced Endfield is sleepwalking into doing something not all that far removed. If the game cultivates a player base who are seeking action, then as more and more regions are introduced, each one asking the player to build a new base from scratch, those action-seeking players will complain, and being the majority of the player base, there is a serious danger of Hypergriff pivoting to action gameplay for that reason. And we have already seen that Hypergriff is perfectly willing to let you sidestep most of the strategy in their strategy game, so long as you pay up. But for the same reason Hoyoverse's attempts at strategy have been absolute dogshit, Hypergriff would not even hold a candle to developers with mature and polished action gameplay systems. Removing the dodge and doubling down on strategic gameplay solves this problem and gives them the space to build on Enfield's strengths and create something truly phenomenal. It is by far the best decision they can make for the longevity of the game. Instead, they are trying to steer it in two different directions simultaneously. One towards that vision they so clearly had a year ago, and one towards appealing to a wider, more general audience. If we're being honest with ourselves though, we all know what general audience really means. Let's not pretend otherwise. It means the Hoyoverse audience. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with playing Hoyoverse games. This does not mean every single Hoyoverse fan ever. The problem is with those who do not see each game as having a unique identity appealing to different kinds of players, but rather they see 3D anime RPG gacha game as a genre in itself. And yes, that does include you, Wuthering Waves fans. Hoyoverse and Kuro games both have their roots in action gameplay, while Hypergriff's roots are in strategy. And yet there are still those who make the argument that trying to be like Genshin or like Wuthering Waves or whatever is a good thing because they're the most popular gacha, and for some reason, popularity is the only thing that matters to these people. I'm going to make what may seem like a strange analogy at first, but just trust me on this. When Gangnam Style released in 2012, it was a global phenomenon. It became the first video to reach 1 billion views on YouTube, and just like that, the Korean pop industry was catapulted into the mainstream. More than a decade after that phenomenon, do we now have a thriving industry consisting solely of songs that are like Gangnam Style? Sounds a bit silly, doesn't it? Psy did not stumble upon some magic formula for success which can be repeated forever with the right balance of ingredients, and Psy has explicitly said this himself.
I cannot call this success because this is called phenomena, and which means I don't do anything. People do it, right? So this was by people, not by me.
K-pop is the leviathan of an industry it is today, not because everybody copied Gangnam Style, but because people took advantage of the opportunities Gangnam Style opened up. Fast forward to 2020 and Genshin Impact becomes a global phenomenon, catapulting gacha games into the mainstream. MiHoYo put some forward-thinking people at the wheel, quickly built a brand identity, renaming themselves Hoyoverse, and now, 5 years later, Hoyoverse has found unfathomable sustained success. But again, this is not because they found some magic formula, but because they took advantage of the opportunities brought about by the phenomenon that was and is Genshin Impact. This is what people so often miss when they insist that every new gacha game needs to be like some other gacha game. Of course, this is no concern for enlightened and experienced 3D anime RPG gacha game enthusiasts like ourselves. I'm sure our judicious and learned beta testers have provided invaluable feedback to the developers. Shall we peruse a few of them? Dash feels underwhelming. It should be more forgiving and have more iframes. It's not to my liking because of my action RPG experiences. You don't say! Game needs a proper dodge, and anyone who says otherwise is coping. A quick look around the gacha space makes this abundantly clear. Not being able to dodge cancel makes the overall combat loop feel unsatisfying because you're forced to take hits that could have been avoided. Yeah, dodging definitely needs rework, like larger iframes for casuals and consecutive dodges, and dodges not breaking your basic attack combo, and more dodging distance, and making dodges more rewarding, and make SP boss 4 instead of 3. It would make combat faster. Please make normal attacks more powerful, and also make each hit give SP, and also stagger, and also please give SP whenever I dodge. Also, please make dodges use less stamina. Also, so far so good, but it feels like some essential features are missing, like iframe rolls and parrying and deflecting. Hey, remember what I said about players wanting more and more action if a dodge exists? Make SP boss 4 instead of 3, and make it recharge faster. Right now, there's no incentive to swap to another character during combat. It cancels the animation and doesn't change the position. I hope they make it more like Wuthering Waves. Oh, here we go, boys, buckle up! Combat's already way better than with the technical test. Being too different will scare new players away. They changed it from the technical test for a reason. But this is my view as someone who's played lots of recent gacha games like Genshin Impact, Zenless Zone Zero, and Wuthering Waves, but never the original Arknights. By the way, there is Girls Frontline 2 for a more top-down strategic approach, which is exactly why I'm not playing it. Here are some exploration options in the competitors I've played. Genshin Impact. The game should tell me which weapon to put on my character, like in Zenless Zone Zero. Also, the game should tell me which gear to put on my character, like in Zenless Zone Zero. Overworld exploration feels kind of slow. A good example of how to make it better would be Wuthering Waves. Right now, this feels like a certain game where the combat is you running around and combining different skills to get the reactions. Damn, that's crazy. I wonder why. Jump feels too short and floaty. It would be great to increase the height or allow a double jump. It would have to redo all the geometry. What do you mean? This is especially important because of improvements to exploration the competition has been making. Oh, will you please fuck off? It would be great if they considered adding platforming abilities like a double jump and wall climbing and swimming and a grappling hook. It's one of the fun aspects of open world games. It's not an open world game, for crying out loud! All the big open world gacha games let you carry over the pity, so this system will not bode well for most of the mainstream gacha community. Well, they can bloody well fuck off then! People need to learn how to skip banners. This is stupid advice. Just look at this example from You just wanted to be more like Hoyoverse. And they're the most popular gacha, period. Not carrying over the guarantee in a game competing with I only build up pity if there is a character I really want dupes for. The concept of dupes is already questionable. Looking at Genshin I know very few people that play Arknights, but dozens that play Hoyo and Kuro games. This is a lie. You know people who play one Kuro game. It is Wuthering Waves specifically. Don't fucking lie to me! It's about what your competition does in business. Oh my god, you people are insufferable. I keep pulling after I get the character to build pity, but that's now a mistake in this game. You have a gambling addiction! Building pity is not a thing! In my ideal gacha system, there is no 50-50 system at all. Just a banner with X pulls to get it guaranteed, and a higher chance to get it at X pulls. This is literally the Endfield system, you idiot! Mark my words, if this system goes live with no changes, the player base from competitors of this game will absolutely not play long term. Bear in mind, by the way, this is just from the Discord server. There will be far more of this in the private feedback surveys. I want to highlight one more post, however, in which two testers state similar concerns to mine and are met with a rather depressing response. The first tester says, "Currently there are a lot of action elements, but the battles don't feel exciting. I think the battle system in the technical test might be more enjoyable. When it comes to action, other companies' games are more refined, and the current system just feels like an inferior version of them, which is just annoying." The second agrees. "There are some opinions that it's plain compared to other games, but Endfield is differentiated from others and is interesting in its own way, so I don't want it to be swayed by those opinions and make it feel too action-oriented. If the dodge window is too lenient, it'll just become a dodging action game." While the third tester, eloquently summing up the vast majority of the feedback, says, "I agree with increasing the action element. The reason is simple, it will attract a wider range of players." This, essentially, is the mindset of people who keep asking for the game to be something it's not. They have no concept of carving out a niche in the market, or games having unique identities, or the developers having their own vision. It's all just monthly revenue PvP. It is boring, it is exhausting, and I lament the apparent reality that Hypergriff seems to be listening to them. As it stands, the base is the one and only thing meaningfully differentiating Endfield from other gacha games. Thankfully, the majority of people anticipating the game's release do seem to understand how important the base is for that reason. But while it does have tons of room to grow and become even better, I have become convinced it will not. The most optimistic outcome I can believe in is that new regions will have a new gimmick, like Jinlong's fluids and pipes. You build a new base with it over the course of maybe a few days at most. The vast majority of players will be satisfied, and that's where it will end. Gacha games are not conventional games. Fundamentally, the characters are the product, and the game is simply a vessel through which the product is marketed. But reducing all gacha games to this fundamental is boring. They're fun! There's so much potential in the live service model for outstanding single-player games to see years of consistent updates and improvements, to foster thriving communities that conventional games often don't have the lifespan for. Instead, a subset of the communities that already exist are preventing that potential from being realized by consistently pushing new endeavors with unique visions into the same box until they all become homogenized imitations of the same thing. Hypergriff needs to decide if they are content with being that imitation, because a game for everyone is a game for no one. There was a moment while playing through the main story, which I think will stick with me for many years. I was thinking about some moments from the alpha, like Fial's desperate attempts to jump onto this ledge because I was standing on it and admiring certain details on the blighted gigaspawns. My boy was caked up, holy! I happened to be in the Origin Lodespring region at the time, and I noticed why the music for this place in particular felt so eerie. Remember the menu theme I was glazing earlier? Now compare that motif to the music from this part of the map. It invokes a feeling of loss, a feeling of knowing something will never be the same again. And suddenly, I had to stop what I was doing because I was hit with an overwhelming feeling of nostalgia for the alpha.
Are you having fun, Topo?
It's really satisfying, actually. I'm a big fan of it. There's so much potential in what this combat can be. Do you have any other comments on the overall storyline? Okay. I can write an essay for this. I want the story to have a spine and let writers take risks. I'll be disappointed if it's dumbed down and basic. Wait, no. Angelina!
Angie, that's not how you abuse gravity.
Angie, no! I'm sorry. I really hope they commit to what they've got here. I think it's sick. Commit to the vision, commit to no dodge and shit. Obviously, like, it needs refining and stuff, but...
You do understand not many people will agree with you.
Yeah, I know. As long as they're actually playing the alpha and understand what the vision is and what it's asking of them, it's totally fine. If they disagree, like, all I can reasonably ask of someone is to think for themselves, right? I can't fucking wait for this game's full release, man. This is a technical alpha. It's like a really bare bones version of this game, and it's already like, I've just been unable to put it down. Just actually insane. I'm so excited, dude. I can't wait. It feels a little weird to talk about it this way because it was literally only a year ago, but I'm making this video in the first place because I need to express how it made me feel. I had so much optimism for what the game could be. But now that optimism is becoming silent lamentation. If Endfield continues on the path it's currently on, every Gacha developer with an eye on this game will see the trend. Originality is overrated and the path to success lies in imitation. The men in suits will take notice and unique, interesting ideas with oceans of potential will not even see the light of sunrise. Endfield is a dying canary in a coal mine. That canary may not be dead yet, but I am not at all convinced Hypergriff is interested in saving it. What could have been the harbinger of a golden age could instead doom itself to be the death knell of Gacha games. I have given every possible piece of feedback I can give to the developers, and so I have done all that I can to convince them to remain faithful to the vision they clearly had. For now, I can only hope the decisions which need to be made will be made by those who are just as enchanted with that vision as I am. And I won't be left wondering what could have been.